Hey Zoology, we are entering our final section of Unit 1, Animal Basics. So in this section, we're going to be hitting on evolution and classification. Some of the evolution stuff is going to be a review from bio, so I'll move kind of fast through it, and then the classification is going to be probably pretty new. So the basic idea of evolution is credited to Charles Darwin. There's controversy as to whether or not he really is the father of evolution, but he definitely was the originator of the idea of natural selection. And evolution, by definition, is change that occurs in genetic makeup of organisms over a long period of time. And it's very important to recognize that evolution occurs in populations, full populations over a large period of time. Individuals do not evolve. Individuals mutate. You can have a mutation in an individual, and then due to natural selection, that mutation becomes advantageous, and then it becomes more and more popular as the time goes on. But that individual did not evolve, that individual mutated, and then now the population is evolving over time. Data suggests that we have all evolved from very simple organisms to the complex ones we are today. And species do not just pop up out of nowhere. Species develop off of other species through those mutations that lead to population evolution. So the first evidence that we have of evolution is fossil records. By looking at layers of fossils, we know that the furthest ones down are usually the oldest. The higher you get to the surface, or the closer you get to the surface, the younger the fossils are. So we could see slight changes happening as you move through them. Certain segmentations forming, and then them actually being there, and then multiple segmentations, and then advanced segmentation. So those pieces of changes that have occurred in populations, we can see slowly occur through fossils. The second piece of evidence there is the homologous structure idea. So different animals have parts of their body that are very similar to one another that are used for different purposes. So the idea we see here with human, dog, bird, and whale, all four of these animals are part of phylum Chordata, but you can see that they use these things differently. Humans use our arms for reaching, for grasping. Dogs use them for pushing off of the surface they're running over. Birds use them to kind of pull back and close their wings for flight. And then whales use their hands for pushing through water, so kind of swimming, yeah. So you can see that different parts of them have evolved differently. Whales don't need long arms. They need longer paddle portions. They need their hands to be longer. They don't need their forearms to be longer because that would lead to some weird kind of twisting at the wrist, and they don't need that. They need the wrist to be solid and the hand just to be able to paddle through the water. Whereas humans need to be able to rotate our arm to grasp things, and so we have a slightly different thing, but the bones are still the same. They just over time have evolved for different purposes, but the structure itself is still genetically the same. You still get the same bones form, they just look slightly different for different purposes. The third evidence that we have of evolution is vestigial structures. So vestigial structures means these are parts of the organism that the organism no longer uses, and those structures are still there. So we see that particularly in whales. Many whales actually still have a pelvic bone. And so we know that, strangely enough, life originated in the ocean, but whales originated from land mammals. So we had organisms that left the ocean, moved on land, and then organisms that moved back into the ocean, and our current whales are a result of that evolutionary pathway. So they used to have back legs, but nowadays they don't need those back legs. They're really just a hindrance in the water. So the legs have slowly gotten smaller and smaller because the organisms that had smaller legs were able to swim further distances, find mates, find food, survive longer, reproduce more. And so that led to those ones that had larger legs dying out quicker, not passing on their genes. And so we still actually can see the pelvic bone in whales. So they still have a pelvis, even though there's no reason for there to be one at that portion of the body. The fourth is embryology. So early on, many different types of organisms look very, very similar and have very similar evolutionary changes or embryonic changes. So they obviously, you can see they're slightly different, but they all have a tail. They have a cephalized head with an eye spot of some sort. They have a respiratory organ. And then as time goes on, they change into what they're going to be. But knowing that originally they start in a very similar thing and then branch off from there gives us the idea that our ancestors all had a very similar embryo, and it has branched off through mutations over time. Natural selection is what drives evolution, the survival of the fittest. So organisms that are most well adapted for their environment survive, reproduce, thrive, and flourish. Those that are worse adapted die off shortly over the course of a couple thousand or million years. And their genes are no longer available for the gene pool. And so those that were more adapted or better adapted for the environment reproduce and pass those genes on forever. So moving on from evolution, we get into classification. So classification is when we group organisms or objects based on their similarities, and specifically taxonomy is the process of doing this for organisms, animals in particular, but organisms. So taxonomy is how we classify organisms. And life on Earth is not simple. This is the species that we know exist, including those that have died off in the past. You'll see some branches kind of end. That means they have not made it to today, but the outer reach of this is today. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. There's a lot of organisms on the planet. Life that has died off in the past, life that has made it all the way through, life that evolved later and has now made it to the end. So we need to be able to come up with a way to kind of classify these. So the first level of classification is the domain. We are found in domain Eukarya. So there are 3 domains: Eubacteria, Archaea, and Eukarya. So we have bacteria, and then we have extreme bacteria, and then we have the eukaryotes. So the eukaryotes, that's where we are, organisms that have nuclei. Prokaryotes split off into the other 2 domains. So within our domain, we have a lot of protists, and then we have the plants, fungi, and animals. So the basic levels of classification that exist, and this is a system that you'll need to memorize, starts with, these are all known as taxa. It starts with domain, but then beneath that we get kingdom. Kingdoms are divided into phyla, the plural phyla, the singular is phylum. Phylum or phyla are divided into classes. Classes are divided into orders. Orders are divided into families, which are divided into genera, which is the plural of genus. And then genus are divided into species. So the order you need to memorize this order: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So the species and the genus are what we use to actually identify the organism on its most specific level. So those last 2 taxa is how we identify the organism. That is its true name. Now we have common names for a lot of these organisms, but their true name is their genus and species. So for humans, we are in kingdom Animalia. Phylum Chordata, so we're part of the chordates, those organisms that have a nerve cord. We're in class Mammalia, so we are mammals, meaning that we are soft-tissued with fur on our exterior. We have gotten rid of a lot of our fur, but we still hold on to fur in certain areas of our body. Order Primates, so we are in a group of mammals that are advanced in terms of consciousness and advanced in terms of our sensory organs. Family Hominidae, so the family that we're in, these are all of the genuses or the genera Homo. So those are going back all the way through kind of what we call cavemen. They're all within our family. Many of them are also in our genus, but we are the only species that remains on the planet that is under sapiens. So we are Homo sapiens, and that is our genus and species. That is how we are known. There are still other organisms out there within our genus and within our family and within our order. But actually, I don't think there's actually any more in our genus, but we are the only one within our genus. But there are other primates out there, and there are other very closely related organisms to us. So we talk about how we use a system of naming with the genus and species because there's confusion otherwise. When we talk about names, when we talk about this organism up here, some people call those pill bugs. Some call them potato bugs, sow bugs, roly-polies, which is the correct name. Just kidding. There is no correct common name. So the point being, we needed a system that was more structured and more obvious that we all could stick to, and that's the binomial nomenclature system. And binomial means two-name system. So we use the genus, we use the species. Both words are italicized. If they are typed, if they are handwritten, they're underlined. Genus is capitalized, species is not. So an example, the crown of thorns sea star, which is my favorite animal on the planet, is part of the genus Acanthaster and the species Plantae. And so we call it Acanthaster plantae because the crown of thorns sea star, that's kind of a vague term. Also, that's an English translation. So if we needed a universal name, we can't use an English translation for something that people all around the world are going to use, but we can agree on Latin being kind of the binomial nomenclature system that we focus on. So this organism is Acanthaster plantae, which is italicized when we type it or underlined if it's handwritten. Cladograms are kind of diagrams we use to show how organisms have evolved over time based on what they share in common. So these are our basic trees where we can figure out, okay, so everything up here has in common the stuff down here. Now, those that have vertebral columns or vertebrae or spinal columns were able to continue up the cladogram, whereas these did not have that, so they broke off. Jawbones left out the lampreys. Four-legged locomotion left out the fish. Amniotic eggs left out salamanders, which are amphibians, and then hair left out the turtles. So mammals are actually most closely related to turtles or reptiles than we are to most amphibians and fish. But this is how we use a cladogram to kind of just say, okay, so at each split, there's something that left someone in the dust and allowed another organism to continue forward. So here's a cladogram of our particular species or our particular group, the primates. So we see that down here, we all shared a lot in common. And then as you go up, something was able to push off. Downward pointing nose pushed the spider monkey off. Loss of tail pushed off the rhesus monkey. And then opposable thumb on the foot. We do not have thumbs on our feet. And so we are able to move forward, whereas the chimpanzees were pushed off out of there. A dichotomous key is what's used to actually kind of build a cladogram usually. And so it's a list of characteristics read in pairs. And so you would say, so the first question would say, organism has fur or fur absent. If it has fur, then you go down one pathway. If fur is absent, then you continue down another pathway. And I'll show you on the next slide what that looks like. And so it kind of tells you like, oh, okay, so you read these two, whichever one. It's almost like a choose your own adventure kind of novel. It's actually identical to a choose your own adventure novel if you've ever done one of those, where you read it and it says, okay, if it's this, you go here. If it's this, you go there. So here's what a dichotomous key might look like. So you start with tentacles present or tentacles absent. If there's no tentacles, this tells you already know what it is. It's a comb jelly. If there are tentacles, you go to question 2 or you go to part 2. Under 2, it's based on how many tentacles. If there's only 8, it's an octopus. If there's more, you keep going. Tentacles hanging down, you would go to question 4. If they're upright, it breaks off as an anemone. So this is how we use a dichotomous key, di meaning 2. And so at every step, there's 2 options. Either something is there or it's not, or it's based on a number or whatever it is, but you follow it based on that. So it's kind of like I said, a choose your own adventure until you get to the final name of an organism. All right, so that's going to be it for this section. And make sure that you submit the notes for this section to get a grade for them, and I will see you next class.